Welcome to the complete guide to Google Analytics 4. This video is about chapter 11, which is optimizing acquisition channels. And it was written by Search Discovery's Lachlan Brown. Now, Lachlan joined Search Discovery by way of empirical path. He was a unique person, a bit of a unicorn in that he was a Google Analytics consultant and an advertising analytics practice lead. He's got a lot of digital marketing experience going back to prior positions with 360i and Sapient. And he's also a proud and busy dad. So welcome, Lachlan.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you for joining. I appreciate your chapter. I've spent a lot of time kind of like sifting through it because it's a complicated topic. I like to frame this chapter up and the next one in by letting people know there's really, if you look at the typical analyst, there are sort of two ways they might use Google Analytics. One is to understand how people are finding my website or app and optimize that. The second is once they're there, what are they doing and how can we make sure they're having a positive experience? So this is about number one, how are people finding the website or the application? And to get us started, I think we can assume, because it's been so ubiquitous, that the typical person viewing this video has used Google Analytics before, probably the old version. And I just want to throw out, what are some things you would say to a person who's familiar with the old version, but they're ramping up on Google Analytics 4? About what they should know when it relates to optimizing your acquisition channels?
Sure. I think, I'm sure this has come up, throughout the chapters, but the interface is substantially different. And so really, if you think of the old Universal Analytics and you open up the acquisition, there's all these different sections there around channel reporting. And you could go down into the, some of the Google ads and other integrations. So it's a bit simplified. You go down, so once you click into the reports, you will see an acquisition section, and that opens up, and you've got there's an acquisition overview, and then a couple defaults that show up there are going to be user acquisition and traffic acquisition. And so this is really kind of your starting point. One thing that has carried over is from UA in my experience is that it's highly customizable. So you've got kind of your starting points, and then there's many ways that you can pivot from there. But just really looking at those starting points. So the user acquisition reports are really focused on how are you obtaining new users. And what's interesting in those reports, they start with a prefix of first user. And so that really indicates that all the reports within that user acquisition section are where you first saw that user. And so those values, the results that come out there are going to persist for as long as Google Analytics can recognize that user. So it's going to go across sessions. The other one, traffic acquisition, is it's really about new sessions. And so that report, the primary dimensions there start with the prefix of session, and that indicates that it's about it's not necessarily persisting across sessions for a single user, but rather what's driving those individual sessions. And likewise, so then metrics that are happening, conversions, events. In the user report, it is for the lifetime of that user, whereas the session, the traffic acquisition is really kind of same session.
Right. So this is a pretty big change. The traffic concept and understanding where a session started is really all you had in Universal Analytics. And for people who have been following Google Analytics for a while, since probably 2016, 2017, Google has been encouraging people to look at users over sessions. And yet it was difficult to do. They released some reports like cohort analysis in Universal Analytics to help with that. But GA4 really makes it easy. It's now laid out for you. And you've also got the ability now to be customized what that means, your user attribution a little bit. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about your property attribution settings and what that does when you modify it?
Sure. Um, yeah, so I mean, and that alone is a big change. So previously, throughout all of the kind of standard reports, sort of acquisition behavior, um, and so on, those were all just using the non-direct last click or basically last click attribution,
Mhm.
and you had to go down into the model comparison and the conversion, essentially the attribution section, um, and then that's where you could actually look at different models. In GA4, you have the ability, you have to have the right kind of privileges, but you can set the default attribution, which is now going to affect all of the standard reports throughout the reporting suite. Um, and so that alone is different. That you can actually change that. But then the default model is data driven attribution. So that's a significant change where that is going to be distributing partial credit across different touch points for an individual user. So it is about the user, is how that's individual user journeys. Those are getting credited across the different touch points that drove them. Um, but the default is data driven, so you're getting kind of partial credit distributed, and like you said, that's being done at the property level. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
a huge change, really flipping it on its head from how it was in UA.
Yeah, for sure. So if I was to compare what the data I see in Google Analytics 4 with the old version of Google Analytics, say I've got them both running on a website, for the
Mm-hmm.
reasons you've mentioned, I would expect them to be pretty different. But I'd love to also hear your thoughts on what if I'm comparing GA4 to a totally different analytics product? Why would you potentially see something different in GA than you would in a different tool? What are some of those reasons?
Sure. I mean, a big change, and I don't know, this may have been discussed in other chapters, but is it's app plus web. So you are having the ability to plug in your mobile app as a data stream, and
Mhm.
so you are able to see users going across devices, and so that alone is going to potentially change the data that you would see, because in Universal Analytics, it was primarily same device. You had, within maybe a user ID view, you could see it, but otherwise, generally speaking, it was not cross-device.
Mm.
So that's something that's going to change your attribution, which is, user-based, because they have the ability to look across, identify and track users as they're going from a mobile app and then to the website, and vice versa. So that's going to be a big change. There's also I think Google, one of the major reasons for GA4 has to do with, uh, adherence to privacy, laws and browser changes and, cookieless future and all that. So they're doing a lot of the data collection. They have the ability, so they're not tracking IPs, so it's anonymized in that regard. But then you also have consent mode, which allows to do modeled behavior and to do modeling for folks that are not consenting. And so that's a huge difference with other platforms where if they're blocking their tracking cookies, that's it.
Right.
By and large, there's no tracking there, and that just represents a big hole. Whereas Google has a lot of sophisticated modeling where they're obeying that, they're adhering to that, the user's wishes, but they're also noting that this is happening, and so they're using anonymized modeling to sort of fill those gaps.
Yeah. So there's an enormous amount that happens in GA4 that you've described just by turning it on. Like everything you've said is somebody, they land on a website, there's, processing that is happening. If you've opted out of cookies using consent mode, your data is received in an anonymous way. We're figuring out where you came from. We're attaching it to the user and to the session. Um, all of these things are kind of out of the box. And these are one of the things that we talk about in chapter 1 is that Google Analytics is available for free specifically because of the belief that if people understand what's happening when they spend their money on Google Ads, that they'll be comfortable spending more. So I would love to just kind of my last questions kind of frame up. If this much is happening for free to help you answer that question, what are some of the your more advanced capabilities of GA4 that somebody could actually take on, but requires, it's not out of the box, right? It requires some custom work.
Sure. Well, we didn't really talk about the integration. So of course, a big power of being within the Google ecosystem is the ability to integrate across the Google advertising platforms, for one. So, they have a lot of, machine learning algorithms that are creating kind of predictive audiences. I mean, that is happening out of the box, but you can use those audiences and push those out to Google Ads, to DV360, et cetera, for remarketing. And this can be like propensity to buy, propensity to churn, and other such audiences. So those are things you can do in Google Analytics. You can also push, GA4 comes with a, included export to BigQuery. And then once you get that data in BigQuery, there's just a, tremendous amount you can do. And it's primarily around, there's a ton you can do around audience building and kind of segmentation and audience building. So you can combine with your first party data, you can enrich that with this GA4 data, and other data sources as well. And you can pull in from the Google marketing platform. And then you can turn that into to kind of advertising segments and audiences. That can be pushed back into GA4 with the measurement protocol, and then, and so on and so forth. Then those can be used now that that's been enriched in BigQuery. There's a lot of work involved there. I'm not saying that stuff happens on its own, but so that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that probably touches on the big stuff there.
So if you have a capable data engineering, data science team, it sort of just opens up a million possibilities. I would say.
And I mean, and in Google Cloud, I mean, I think it's very cheap. They've built a ton of capabilities in there. So the beauty there is you don't have to build from scratch. They do have to have some fundamental knowledge. The other one we didn't mention was media mix modeling or marketing mix modeling, and that's also something again, because you have that direct. It's so easy to get that data in there into BigQuery from the advertising platforms, from Google Analytics, pulling in, CRM, call center, all this kind of first party data. And then they have a lot of modeling capabilities kind of built in. You have to understand some really, complicated sounding words. And like I said, you definitely have to have some data scientists involved. But it's, I would say it's relatively inexpensive, sort of cost effective, and probably quick because they've just got so much capabilities that are pre-built there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that wraps up my questions. Thank you, Lachlan. Optimizing Acquisition Channels, Chapter 11. I hope people read it. Thank you for the work you put into it. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. I mean, it's fun to learn about this stuff. So anytime.